I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen. That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Libertarian Podcast Review. And we have the perfect guest with us today. I want to welcome everybody to Pete Quinones of Freeman Beyond the Wall podcast. Pete, thank you for slumming it today and joining me. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Tyler?
Great. So a few things. One, this podcast kind of started out with, I thought, I got a tweet from Clint of Liberty Lockdown, and he was just a minor player online at the time. And he sent out this tweet and he said, hey, this interview is going to blow up the world. The Liberty world is going to convert millions. And so I said, oh, I'll check it out and I'll knock this Grandmaster B down a little bit and tell him that his program sucks. So I reviewed it. I loved it. Now he had you on, you've been on his show. He's been on Dave. He asked Dave if he would sexually pleasure Dr. Paul. So if things go well for you, I mean, on this interview, you could be blowing up as well.
Sounds great. Thanks. Yeah. Please don't ask me that question, though.
No, I will not ask you that question. Okay. Trust me. That was very brave of Clint, and he's still making it throughout the world. So I don't know. I mean, Dave, I guess, took it pretty good. So have you had? Let me just ask you. So you've been doing this space for quite some time, the podcast stuff, and what was your goal when you first did it as far as your liberty goal, and what is it now, and how has it kind of changed?
Honestly, I can't tell you what my goal was to start out. I think probably it was altruistic. Like maybe I can be a voice out there that's in a different style than everyone was currently at the time. And over the last year, it's just become, my thinking is usually a lot more radical. I tend towards the more radical. Even before I started really coming out in the last year, I had a lot of radical thoughts about ways to do things and, how things might end up, unfortunately. And over the last year, it was just no more holding back, say what's on your mind. And I just want to be that person who is, when everybody else is being, okay, we need to be rational and everything about this, and be like, nah, it's not time to be rational. It's time. Maybe we need to be a little irrational. And I'm not talking about irrational where we're just making no sense whatsoever, but maybe I need to be the person who says the things that people are thinking, but don't want to say because maybe they want to seem respectable or they don't want to lose their YouTube channel, which one more strike and my YouTube channel is gone. So yeah, wow. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
I mean, well, look, what you have to say, and we need these kind of people, we need you out there in a sense, pushing it, because there's so many people. Now I own my own business. I mean, if people want to come after me, I am the HR department, it's kind of nice. However, there's a lot of people out there that are concerned that they're going to be possibly losing their jobs or, vilified in the community if they do come out with, and it's not extreme views, but what you're saying. So I think you're necessary, but how do you deal with people who are maybe hiding in the, using you as a cover in a sense to go out there and fight the fight? Is that valid for them to do so? Or do you kind of wish that they would step up?
Okay. So you're saying people who are not talking, maybe using the kind of rhetoric that I'm using.
Yeah.
They just have to be ready. I mean, I can't judge them. People are at different stages. People are at different places, and yeah, people have different constraints, family, different kinds of things, part of a network or something like that. And yeah, I just have to do what I do, and hopefully other people will start doing it as well. I mean, I think the time for respectability is gone. I mean, when you have the former head of the CIA, basically calling libertarians insurrectionists, which would mean they're treasonous. I'm not going to run from that. I think we should lean into it, basically.
Right. And some of the topics I want to kind of get into with is the non-aggression principle, which you've talked about lately. Little changes. I kind of want to get your mind set on that. Waco and some religion and kind of the mix of all that. But I was thinking about, and before I'll jump back this, but like with Waco as an example, or Ruby Ridge, where there is kind of extreme groups, and it's the time to even side with them in a sense over the government seems kind of maybe it's icky. But I mean, when Brennan's calling out the libertarians as an example of domestic terrorists, you can see that if you're not protecting these vilified groups, pretty soon that Overton window is switched to where normal people, I mean, masks and all this other stuff are considered the outcasts, right? So it's necessary. But how do you deal with that online? Because I see that you're, I'm not going to out your Twitter handle at all, but you're pretty aggressive at going at some of these milquetoast libertarian types.
Well, I mean, to go back to like you mentioned Waco and Ruby Ridge, that they were like they're like out there groups or extreme groups. I don't really think they were extreme groups. I think that, take for example Ruby Ridge. Ruby Ridge is an example of somebody who was like, okay, I think that a race war is coming, that the government is stoking it, and I'm going to go live a half an hour away from the Canadian border in Idaho
Right.
and hide from everyone. And they went and found him. I mean, they're not going to leave you alone. So Waco, the same thing. I mean, Waco, there was weird stuff going on there. There may have even, there was probably immoral stuff going on there that doesn't mean the ATF had to go in there. The local sheriff knew David would show up to the house unannounced, would go in, and they did investigation after investigation and couldn't find any of the wrongdoing that they were being accused of. That doesn't mean that wrongdoing wasn't being done, but still, I mean, you don't burn people alive. Just don't burn people alive. I mean, if that's what civilization is, it's not civil. We're not civilized. The milquetoast libertarians, I mean, I don't know what else to do with them, because if I'm going after them with an anonymous account, I mean, with an anonymous account, I can pretty much get away with saying anything I want. So it's it could almost be viewed as cowardice. But as far as the milquetoast libertarians go at this point, I assume that, well, let me start off a best case scenario. A lot of them own their own businesses, maybe work from home, and in the last year, they didn't suffer at all.
Yeah.
I assume, and I know this about some of them, especially the ones that like a group on Facebook that starts with an F and what Tom Woods calls the loser brigade. I mean, these are people who live at home. I mean, they live with their parents. So, I mean, how did they suffer? Unless their parents suffered. And if their parents suffered over the last year because of the lockdowns and because of what the government did, then, I would hope that they would have some kind of radicalization, at least brewing up in them. But I mean, if the whole goal of libertarianism is to be accepted by the mainstream, then I mean, I want out. So that's not what my goal is. I don't believe that's what Dave's goal is. I don't believe that's what Scott's goal is. That's why I'm down with what they're doing. And I just think we're at a point where it's fight or flight. And I'm not, I've considered flight, but that's not who I am. So
you're hitting all these little notes I want to make. So you're perfect. So let's segue into one of those, which was, there was a podcast, I think it was just yesterday. It's Chris Spangle's show, the We Are Libertarians. And they had a guy, it was a Mises Caucus guy, and then two lefty guys, basically, I say lefty, but lefty libertarians, really going after him in the Mises Caucus. And I thought, I think it was Jacob, did really well. But I want to play a clip because they take such, and by the way, it was like almost a 2-hour podcast, and the first 2/3 of it made me want to quit any kind of libertarian movement, because they're just so, focusing on the most ridiculous things. And then the last third, they just talked about stuff that was important. And I'm like, oh yeah, it made me want to stay and then take over. So let me play you this clip and see what you think about this. Okay.
Conversations about it. But as Andy Craig, who's a member of the Pragmatist Caucus, who I really appreciate a lot and really appreciate what he authors, one of the things that he kind of called out is he's like, I was reading Human Action the other night, and I read a lot about, marginal utility and things like that, but I must have missed the parts about, keeping all of the trans people out of sports and whatnot. And it just seems like for a caucus that calls itself the Mises Caucus, which I have to admit I have a problem with, because I think the caucus is misrepresenting a man who I hold in great esteem.
Okay, so your reaction there. First of all, do you think he actually read Human Action?
Well, that I assume that's one of the two people, the other guests, who are against the Mises Caucus. Okay,
correct.
First of all, anyone who says that Andy Craig is at all a positive to libertarianism just gets dismissed out of hand. Andy Craig is at best just a misguided milquetoast libertarian. At worst, he's a plant. At worst, he's been put there to discredit libertarianism 100%. He's left wing. He's a Democrat. He's not a libertarian. I'm sorry. He's not a libertarian. He's a Democrat, and he should be with the Democratic Socialists. Now, he's never read Human Action. I mean, most people have not read Human Action.
It's a tough slog.
Yeah, it's especially the beginning. It's hard. When he starts off with philosophy, and most people can't read philosophy, it's hard for people to get through. If the beginning is going to be the hardest part, then and trans rights. There's no such thing as trans rights in libertarianism. Trans rights, if you're talking about trans rights, the only thing you should be talking about is that trans people, trans individuals have a right to not be aggressed upon. If you want to say that they should have all these protective rights, then that's positive rights, and positive rights are not libertarian. Positive, that means you have to set up a government or set up something. And if you want to set up something private to protect trans people, I'm fine with that. But what it inevitably is going to come down to is going to come down to state control, and it's going to come down to a state apparatus. And the goal is to not have a state apparatus to do that, especially to protect what? Less than 1% of the population? I mean, this is woke left stuff. This is where you want a very, very small minority to basically dictate what the majority does. And I'm against that. I mean, I'm literally against it. I think that they're the enemy. If you are talking about group rights, that, these people black people need to be protected and everything like that. Individual black people need to protect themselves. I mean, here's the easiest way to have trans rights and black rights, or rights for anybody. Let everybody be armed. Let them protect themselves.
Right.
I mean, it's the easiest way. I mean, that's what I was saying last year during the riots, during the fentanyl riots. The was you release all gun laws, and anyone who comes upon your property or seeks to hurt your person, you take care of it yourself. You won't be charged. I mean, put me on that jury. I'm gonna nullify it. There's no such thing as group rights. There's no such thing as positive rights. It's amazing to me that people don't fundamentally get that libertarianism is about negative rights and not positive rights. It's just, it floors me every single time.
Well, and you're arguing everything else they were saying there, because later on he's like, look, this is a very, this group, they've been aggressed on for years, and so therefore we should be, supplying or doing something to retroactively fix that problem.
Have they been aggressed upon?
Wow.
Because when I look at the statistics, the people who are aggressing upon them are their lovers and their family.
Right.
Okay, so how do we stop that?
Well, they're not allowed to participate in women's sports.
Oh, they're not allowed to participate. Oh my God. Yeah.
Which, by the way, the argument there is almost a misogynistic argument. You're no longer taking women's rights, right? Because, like, by the way, I have a podcast, we do cycling, and this is a big deal in the world of cycling. Obviously, there's a trans woman man won world championships a few years ago. Now, if you look at testing that they have for a man to go to transition to a woman, they've got all this, testing and testosterone and but you don't have a woman trying to transition to a man. It's just, normal drug testing, because there's a difference there, right? So, part of this issue is what he's staying out here. I just don't have a problem with. But if you also think about what he said about Mises, maybe I want to take your take on this. Mises wouldn't have thought that back then, because he probably would, and this isn't a downgrade to Mises or trans or whatever, he would have thought of that as someone with a mental disorder.
Most likely. I mean, it wasn't as prevalent back then, and then you have to ask, why is it so prevalent now? I mean, have you heard of these clusters where it's like one person, one boy in a high school will start transitioning, and then a bunch of the friends will start as well.
Right.
It's like, I mean, this is groupthink. This isn't a problem of identity, where somebody says, I was born a man, but I feel like a woman, so I want to be a woman. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that. But let's not pretend that when they're 40 years old, they're not going to need a prostate exam. I mean, they're men. I'm sorry, but sorry. I mean,
well, so at what point is a gynecologist going to be
for the people of science? They seem to really not understand science, and they put it aside and jettison it whenever they need to.
At what point is a gynecologist going to be a hate crime? I mean, performing your art there. So look, let me kind of move on to some other things, because they were also talking. It was just a fascinating thing because Dave kind of got into it, and it was all about, they were calling him out with a tweet that he had about saying transphobia or trans and some shit. But he was really talking about issues in the let's not get bogged down with these small minor issues. And to a trans person, those aren't obviously minor issues, I guess, right, but they should still be concerned about the big stuff. So the big stuff is the focus. And when you start, paring it down to concerned about this, you're really just, I think, trying to exit people from the party. And I think that was their goal. So I don't know if you're even in the Libertarian Party anymore. I mean, I am. I'm actually speaking at next week at the Libertarian Party Washington State Convention. Oh, yeah. So I am, and I really, at this point, I don't even know. I'm doing it just to get rid of the people, to get rid of these horrible people. I mean, that's the reason why I'm like, it's my goal to just see these people leave the party and cry. They're horrible. The ones that have tried to get people fired from their jobs, ones that are saying that I was calling for transgender genocide when all I did was criticize a transgender person. What are they doing in libertarianism? If it's not all an op just to make us look like friggin' idiots. I mean, here's the thing about what Dave and Scott are doing, and what Michael Heiss has been doing since the beginning. They're trying to recruit libertarians into the Libertarian Party. Right. That's all they're trying to do. They're trying to get libertarians to join the Libertarian Party. Libertarians don't want to join the Libertarian Party because it's become so illiberal. It's become like a place for just like the culture at large, a loud minority of left woke idiots, and they need to be removed. And the way they're going to be removed is we're going to recruit so many people into there, and at one point I was like, man, we just need to get urban, get Maj Touré to get the inner city in there. We need to get vets in there. And I just want to see a culture of, if you get in my face with this shit, calling me a racist, calling me a Nazi, I'm going to smack you in the mouth. Because that's what it comes down to. I mean, really. I mean, non-aggression principle. I mean, kiss my ass. I mean, you have people getting up in your face and accusing you of being what everybody considers to be the worst people that ever lived. Right. You deserve a smack in the mouth. Well, I pushed back on the host on Twitter, and I basically said, what is it with this prags that are so concerned about they have such a problem with black people, Maj Touré and Hotep Jesus. And I'm like, they think they're irredeemable, right? If they want to come into the party, maybe they've said some things, and if you listen to the podcast, the guy brought up, would you court communists too? And he's like, well, if they have liberty ideas and they're coming over this direction, of course. Then the host, then the host pushed back on me, and he's like, hey, blatant racism and basically labeling racism is just as bad. And I'm like, see, now you've got the point. You consider everyone automatically racist, and we have to defend everything with I'm not anti-black, but you're doing the exact same thing. So
you're talking about Chris Spangle?
No, it wasn't Chris Spangle. It was Hody. I don't know. Hody John or John Hody. I don't know.
Chris is no better. Chris accused me. Chris accused me of wanting to, when I said that I was not going to support Black Lives Matter last summer, Chris accused me of wanting to own slaves. So that guy's dead to me.
Well,
I mean,
that's
that guy,
ridiculous.
yeah, I mean, he's retarded. I mean,
But
he's
that,
well, he has a podcast that he does with a black woman who treats him like shit and basically, shits all over him. So, I mean, apparently, I don't know, he feels some affinity, like what, maybe he grew up in the hood. Look, I grew up in the hood. I don't think Chris Spangle grew up in the hood. I mean,
last thing, and then we'll move on from this. But it was talking about celebrating. They actually use the word celebrating trans rights and such.
No.
And the problem with that is, as a religious person myself, they don't celebrate my religion, right? And I don't expect them to, and I don't expect atheists in the party to be excited about my religion. They shouldn't. They should just leave me the F alone and allow me to go on as I please. Much like what we want to do with any trans person as well.
I mean, libertarianism is about economics, and
Right.
It's supposed to be about the non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle is not using political force to achieve your needs. It's not. I mean, if you have unapproved opinions, if you have an opinion that you think that you're really worried that 13% of the population does 52% of the violent crime, and that you want to talk about that. Well, I mean, that doesn't mean that you're abandoning the non-aggression principle. It means that you're pointing out a fact. It's a fact no one wants to talk about because, it's so verboten, but so you can talk about it. I mean, that doesn't mean you're not a libertarian if you bring it up just because, and here's another one. It was like when last year they were making this argument that Black Lives Matter, the organization, and Black Lives Matter, the movement on the street, are two different things. Well, it's complete horseshit. I proved it in through research and article I wrote for my Substack. But what they were, so I went to Black Lives Matter, the org, which is right. Supposedly has nothing to do with the street, and it said that Patrisse Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, is an advisor for the boots on the ground. And when I pointed that out to people, they said, "Yeah, I saw people who on Stormfront pointing that out too." Well, that's not an argument. If people on Stormfront are pointing out the fact that it says something on that website, and then I point it out, I mean, there were libertarians marching with Black Lives Matter last year in Black Lives Matter protests with people standing next to people who had hammer and sickle flags.
Right.
So libertarian is, I assume what that means is that the commies and the ones who killed 100 million people, they're okay because there wasn't a racial component to it until much later when there was a racial component to it.
Right.
But the 6 million that died because there was a racial component to that, well, that's verboten. You can't. These people they're retarded. They're done. They're stupid. They're going to be gone. They're going to walk out on their own when they see that there's testosterone in the room. I mean, that's probably what they're most friggin' allergic to.
With that in mind, so you've come in and out, and I know you've had different thoughts. And people, by the way, check out. Well, most people probably are watching this know you, not me, but check out Pete's podcast. And on your website, you go back to and I did this on my review of your show, to episode 1, and you have a litany of things there, but you've changed your views. It seems like kind of like in the party, then there was a time you're just all agorism. Now it sounds like you're kind of back trying to do some good as well. What do you make of, and I don't know if you saw this, but your buddy Vin Armani just kind of came at Dave and Tom online about saying that they were, what was the word? He was tone deaf.
I don't talk about my friends fighting.
Okay. Well, then with that in mind, and I appreciate that, by the way, there are two mindsets of the party, which is Dave's trying to do kind of a takeover and Vin's kind of left. I see both sides, and I know Clint's talked about doing, and you've talked about maybe leaving too. It's kind of the Gulch idea, right? Of just leaving, or, are you still going to stay in there like the Reardon? I don't know why I'm using Ayn Rand, but staying in there with Reardon, trying to still fight and fight and fight. I see both paths, to be completely honest. So I don't want you getting involved in any of this split stuff, but with those two ideas in mind, do you waffle on those, or do you still feel like, you want to stay here and Vin moving?
Well, I think that you're not going to convince 100% of the people to do one or the other. So people are going to choose to, let's use the term fight or flight. Some people are going to choose to fly, and some people are going to choose to fight. I choose to support both of them. I choose to say whatever you want to do is fine, and I'm not going to criticize one or the other for wanting to leave and possibly go do like a gulch kind of thing, or if you want to stay and fight. I support both. I don't think that there is one way. I don't think that it's going to be one way. I think it's going to be one many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in California, yet I'm trying to live my life here. Speaking of which, red flag laws coming into effect here. I know you've written about these, even in California, that we have gun restraining orders. Now, I'm an attorney. I do mostly family law. We do domestic violence restraining orders, which is, there's 3 levels, basically. There's criminal, civil, and then, those are the 2. But as far as restraining orders go, the most difficult is the criminal, then there's the civil, and then there's the domestic violence family restraining orders, which they hand out like candy. I mean, it's just, you can be where you're beating someone up or you're harassing them by, texting them too much. And the immediate on that is what's called a CLETS, which is a California law enforcement telephonic system, which they enter you in. You have to turn in your guns. So in effect, there's already this red flag law in effect out here in California. Plus, we have this red flag or gun restraining order that you can just do as well. That goes through the criminal side. And so it's a little bit different, but all of them are done on what's called an ex parte order, where you just file your motion. The judge hears it on the pleadings, and it can be, as bad as that warrant that they had at Waco there. It's just all nonsense. And they do those. And I've had clients, officers trying to, the ex-wife is like, oh, he's threatening, and, their guns are taken away and their jobs are taken away. What do you see as the prospect for people in these different states? California you're in Georgia. I don't know what they have out there, but with these coming down the line and the police involvement.
I mean, what you just described to me, I didn't know that existed. That's pretty insane. I mean, that's literally like, okay, so a husband and a wife decide to get divorced, and the wife is just like, all right, well, even if they weren't violent, okay, I need a restraining order, take away his guns. I mean, that's a hell of a weapon. That's a hell of a weapon. I mean, that is using state violence to get your way, to make people pay. When I think of restraining orders, I think of Town of Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, where the restraining order meant absolutely nothing, and the husband just came in and took the kids and then ended up killing them all, and then killing himself, and then dying in a shootout with the police. That's alarming. I mean, I just don't. I guess because living in Georgia, and there's such a rich gun culture here, and I could never see something like that happening. I mean, police would end up dead. People would shoot if they passed something like that. I just don't know how. I mean, I guess California is just, that's the culture that they've adopted over the decades. And California really, when you look at California, I think wasn't until like 1979, 1980, where in San Francisco you couldn't even be a teacher if you were gay. I mean, it used to be like really, really right wing in California, and then it just like overnight, like just switched. And man, I don't know, these red flag laws are scary. One of the reasons they're most scary is because you can go on social media and engage right wingers, and you can see right wingers saying about the guy who got killed in Minneapolis the other day. Do you remember his name?
Dante Wright, is that?
Okay, Dante Wright. And they were like, well, yeah, he shouldn't have had an illegal gun. Okay, are you pro Second Amendment? Yeah, I'm pro Second Amendment. Then please explain to me what an illegal gun is.
Right.
I mean, you can make that argument from a practical standpoint and be like, look, I know that there should be no gun laws in the United States. That anyone you should be able to buy it at the grocery store without any ID, pay cash. But when you're somebody who's pro Second Amendment and pro gun, and you have to make the argument because you are pro cop, because you're basically a cop sucker that, oh, he should, he had an illegal gun. I mean, that's just what is that? What else is that going to lead to? It's going to lead to red flags. I mean, we've seen red flags. We had that one up in Maryland that happened. I think it was really the first one that was documented, where they went to the guy's house and everything. And it turned out that his sister or sister-in-law had just called it in and was just mad at him or something like that. And he ends up dead. And yeah, I mean, I think with Biden, well, with whoever Biden's puppet is running things and looking at passing all these executive orders, I mean, I think a lot's going to come down to states' rights. I think a lot is going to come down to cities, maybe some cities saying we're sanctuary cities. And I really think that is the only way forward now. The only way forward now is going to be basically jurisdictions saying, nullifying the laws that are being passed. And I think you're going to see a lot of people voting with their feet. You already saw a lot of left-leaning people leaving California and going to like Austin and places like that. And I mean, I'm here in Atlanta and I'm seeing California and Illinois and New York license plates, and every time I see them, I cringe. And
as you should.
Yeah. And I think that's what's happening. I think that that's going to really be the only answer, is nullification, and a lot of people just getting up and moving, and a lot of people just saying this is a line in the sand and we're not going to stand for it.
Well, my point on I just want to reiterate it, just
Sure,
from the restraining order issue, from what we have here. So people think, they think of domestic violence as the most egregious thing. I mean, I've been in court, and the case in front of me is, I don't want to nationalities, but where maybe violence is a little more prevalent in their community, and the wife has just been obliterated, evidence, it's so easy to see. And then your case comes up and it's, this guy sent me nasty texts. So you've got those two, and maybe they both get get ordered. And so it's, and the case this is the one I just had this winter, or this over the Christmas time. Cop mom is a little crazy, says he was going to the gun rack. His kids saw this. Now we were able to prove that he wasn't even home at the time. It was crazy, but for a month and a half, he was on desk duty then. So he's losing his job. He had to, turn in all his weapons. And now this is a police officer. I get, we're not necessarily sympathetic.
Yeah, I'm not really upset about that, but go on.
But
yeah.
I'm just using him as an example. So if there's anything you need your weapon for, which is typically officers, but if you just want, maybe you're that person. The point is, you can use this as a way to try to get in and manipulate this person, taking away their weapons, taking away their ability to protect themselves. Maybe you are the aggressor. We see this all the time in these cases where one party they know how this works, so they file a restraining order, and they're actually the danger, right? And so you've now you've made it so they're not able to protect themselves, and the bad stuff happens. And my point on all this is how easy it is for this to happen. So when people just like, oh, but it goes through a process, it goes through a judge. Sure. A judge looks at this one, he doesn't get to have any input from the other side, and he makes a ruling, what's called ex parte, just one-sided. Then he sets a 21-day hearing that you can have your due process. But in the meantime, you're without for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, the courts are. Yeah, I just don't know I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, other than really just tearing apart the system.
Did you think that this summer, with all the riots, that maybe would have a little bit more? At least I thought that maybe going forward, gun confiscation or gun control wouldn't be as big of an issue as far as them able to hook their claws into it. Am I totally wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the state's always going to want to disarm the people, especially after what they did last year. And when you look at the way they responded to COVID, it's not it would be, I wouldn't say fun, but it'd be a good exercise to wonder exactly how that would have been handled if there weren't, over 500 million guns in this country.
Right. Yeah.
And then, when you talk about it's so easy, it just seems in California, if you want to get someone disarmed, it's really easy. I mean, I assume that that a friend could, if they knew somebody had guns and they had a fight with them, they could file a restraining order against them to have their guns taken away. That just seems like, are there any other states besides California that do that? I assume there are.
I imagine, just as an example, the Domestic Violence Restraining Order, that's a Domestic Violence Prevention Act. I think that's a federal act, so they can enact those in different
So
states.
they can just take guns.
Yeah. Well, there's a gun restraining order that they have on the books here in California, and that one can be done by a family member. It can be done by a coworker. So, what if you're a YouTuber and as your, I don't know, a coworker is anybody else on YouTube? I don't know. Maybe they'd be able to expand that out. So yeah, the ability and the reach is quite expansive.
Yeah, that's insane. I didn't even know that existed, and you're giving me new information. And oh man,
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't want to blackmail you on a.
I mean, it's just so, and you still have people out there who are like, well, if we just follow the Constitution,
right?
Jeez, and you look at that, and it's just like, God.
I mean, my thinking, and you've really opened my eyes when I came to this, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I guess now I kind of was making this switch and found you along the way. I loved a lot, especially the economic stuff. And then I start hearing, the anti-police and anti-war stuff. And I'm like, hey. But man, I went down that slope so fast, I got a head rush that, I'm in the right camp. And some of it was just, I guess I was living so long with a lot of hypocritical ideas that I, just kind of push away. And once you melt those and you're just kind of narrowing everything down to, property rights and for me, the non-aggression principle in a sense, then maybe we'll skip into religion with this. It's actually made my religious experience more fruitful because I've stopped worrying about all these political dynamics of, is my team right? The right wing or the left is always the problem when they're really so similar and minuscule issues. I know you've had a past with, you've talked about religion and the fact, and I heard a podcast where you discussed that quite openly. What's your relationship with that now? And then just kind of your growth on that, if you don't mind me asking.
Well, I mean, I don't really have a relationship now with any kind of religion, any kind of organized religion. I was talking to somebody the other night, and I said, if I was going to really nail it down, I would say that I would lean more towards Hinduism at this point than anything, because I practice Hinduism. I've been a Christian, I've been Catholic, I've been a Protestant Catholic, studied Buddhism in a local temple, and studied Hinduism, probably come down closer to Hinduism. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's really personal. As somebody who was a Christian and who studied and is very well versed with scripture, I have a hard time. Well, I don't have a hard time believing it. It has been a great campaign to teach Christians that they should worship the state and should bow down to the state, because a proper reading of scripture, and I don't care whether it's the old covenant or the new covenant, is that God is supreme and that the state, I mean, Satan is even called the ruler of this world. So what do you attach to? Why would you be attached? I mean, I like what the Hasidim in New York did in response to this, where they just completely rebelled and were like, no, we're not going to do anything that you want. But I haven't seen enough of that from Christianity as a whole. I mean, there have been some promising things that I read and saw, especially in Kentucky early on. But for the most part, I also think that a lot of churches, when persecution starts happening, if you know your church history, especially in the early church, before Constantine, before the melding with the Roman Empire, I mean, it was you almost had to meet in secret sometimes. So it seems like a lot of that probably happened this year. And that sounds good to me. I think that the more Christians can see the state for what it is, the better there is a chance for the Overton window shifting and for culture to have a bigger influence on politics. And I would hope that Jews, Christians, Muslims, anyone could see the state for what it is. Especially, I mean, I don't get how religious people who believe there's a God and that God is above all worship the state the way they do and are like willing to die for the state. That's just the one that I just can't get through my skull. I mean, I don't understand why there's so many Mormons in the FBI. I just don't get that. I mean, it's like, I mean, come on. It's it really, when I became an anarchist, and I was like, oh, like immediately I thought, oh, Christians should pretty much all be anarchists. And then you just look around and you're like, got that flag is so prominent. And then you look at churches and they have the American flag in the church and everything. And it's like, that's, you almost want to go, Jesus money changers, the tables of the money changers, and start turning those flags upside, turning those flags over and burning them, because it's just like, what is this doing here? This doesn't belong here.
It's a really interesting dynamic. And then this summer, the COVID stuff happened. So I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, grew up that way, part of that. And so, yeah. And what's interesting is seeing different churches that I've kind of been involved with in my community, buck the system, and then other ones that just bend to it. And then the overall church conference kind of coming down on the churches that are trying to do what I think is the right thing. Just odd. And your point is, my the upbringing of our church is conscientious objectors from war, as an example. And I've always previously I thought about this, and I'm like, those guys, they're not willing to put it on the line. I don't, they go and serve, and I think it's just a way of, they'll be a cook or a medic, and that just kind of isn't the right thing. But I think my problem with the foreign wars, and I think you have really helped me with, and Dave and Scott, is that you can be, because before this, it was always the pro-war, the anti-war, especially let's take Vietnam. It was, well, it's pro-communist or you're pro-America, and how do you be anti-war and anti-communist? And I know that seems weird, but that's really the way it was projected. All these college students with their little red book, their Mao and everything. So when I found you guys, and I started, actually it was a Ken Burns documentary. There was an enlisted officer there that was, hated Jane Fonda and hated the war, and I was like, well, this is strange. But I think it's the same with religion. So once again, thanks for bringing me over on that side. And I don't know, anything to say about that?
No, I mean, the worst thing that the state does is kill people. And it's just, I don't understand how religious people can stand for that. I mean, they can, I guess if they read the Old Covenant, they can get it. They can figure out ways to justify it, but there's nothing in the New Testament that's you're going to find that can justify it at all. It just, I'm just as somebody who knows his church history, knows scripture and everything, it just I'm just astounded. I'm constantly just baffled by the attitude of and like you're saying, Seventh-day Adventist. I have a coworker who's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he's a part of the cult, the COVID cult. Yeah. 2 masks. I just don't get it. I mean, this is a guy I've talked to. I've been like, look, religion's been persecuted by the state forever. Why would you respect it? And I even told him, when I was writing articles about Waco, I said, look, the Branch Davidians came out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They're basically a sect of Seventh-day Adventism. These are your brethren. You should look and see. I mean, even if they lost their way on a lot of on the customs and everything, they still are adhering to eschatology being the most being at the forefront. Why look at what they did to them, and then when COVID happened, people just lose their minds. It's just it was just crazy to watch.
Let's talk about the Waco thing real quick. So, because I want to get away from kind of some of my questions for you. First of all, you've done some great work. Your interviews with Thibodeau have been phenomenal. A lot of writing as well. Like you said, Adventist came from there. I actually, my 10-year high school reunion, they posted up that there was a class behind me that, and I've tried to verify this and I can't actually verify it, but they said she died at Waco. So there was some cross there of, Adventists still going back to that kind of stuff. So for me, I've been well versed in this, but once again, from when it happened to now, my thoughts have changed. And the media at the time, it's a cult, it's all this crazy stuff. Why don't you just take us through the line between Ruby Ridge and Waco and even Oklahoma City and how that comes about and what you see from there?
Sure. Ruby Ridge happened about 6 months before Waco. And I think a lot of people know Randy Weaver and his wife, Vicky, their son, Sammy. And she was pregnant when they moved up there. They had a baby. I can't remember the baby's name. They basically moved to northern Idaho to get away from civilization, basically. And Randy was, it's not really clear how he felt about Black people and everything, but when he went up there, he started fellowshipping with a group of white supremacists, and they asked him to join. He didn't want to join. He just wanted to hang out with them. Then I guess there was undercover people there who undercover agents who convinced him to sell shotguns to them, and then at the last second was like, hey, can you saw off the barrel and everything? And a shotgun, I believe, the barrel has to be 18.5 inches long in order to be legal. Anything below that, you have to have a tax stamp according to the National Firearms Act. And he cut it off, and they arrested him for it, and it took him to trial, and they rescheduled it. Well, at the last scheduling, they rescheduled it and didn't tell him, so he didn't show up to court. So they put out a warrant for him, and they decided that they were going to go and basically invade his property. And so you had some agents go around, try to enter the property from the back, and dog starts barking, and Sammy and their friend, I can't remember what their friend's name is, who was with them,
Hughes or something.
Yeah. Gary, was it Gary Hughes? I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe.
But they ran down there, and apparently a shootout happened and everything. And Sammy, I think he was 15 years old or 14 years old. They shot him in the back, and one of the agents ended up dead. And the book, there's a book out there where they had always said that Sammy or the other gentleman had shot the agent, and then, God, I can't remember what the name of the book is, but it came out that he was probably killed by friendly fire.
Oh,
so, and then they brought in the FBI hostage rescue team, and then everything famous after that. Randy and the gentleman were out walking on the grounds one day. They opened fire on him. They ran back to the house and said, scream, Vicky, open the door. Vicky opens the door. She takes a bullet in the face while she's holding a baby. And then for another, I think it's 6 more days, they hold them off and everything. And then a local guy comes and talks Randy out. And the ATF was brought up on charges. They were all dismissed. I mean, the hostage rescue team was brought up on charges. They were all dismissed. And it was a black eye for them. I mean, it was bad for them. It was bad press. So they needed a win. So they basically looked around for a group that they, thought was a soft target or something like that. And they found the Branch Davidians. And the Branch Davidians had a gun business, a legal gun business, like, 100,000 other people in Texas. And they trumped up charges. I mean, they had a chance to. They had ATF agents who had went undercover in there, and they were allowed to go in and out of there. They had set up a house across the street. And I mean, the Davidians knew that they were agents. They had no problem with it because they weren't hiding anything. They were people could come and go. That's what people say. Oh, it was a compound. It's like, if it was a compound, how come the sheriff could just walk through the front door anytime he wanted? It was a church. It was basically a church. So, you know, then they show up for Operation Showtime, you know, accused them of being drug runners so that they could get helicopters from the military. And I think everybody knows the whole Waco story, you know, 51 days, and they end up burning them alive at the end. And 9 people escape and survive. And then exactly 2 years later, that was April 19th, 1993, exactly 2 years later, on April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols set off a bomb in a truck outside of Oklahoma City. But if you go to libertarianinstitute.org/OKC, you can find out that there's way more to the story than that. You know, they were Nazis, they were neo-Nazis, and they had a place called Elohim City, where there was a bunch of people planned this whole thing out, including some undercover agents, including an undercover German agent, Andreas Strassmeyer, whose dad was prime minister of Germany at one point. And, you know, and he was being run by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which most people don't know. That it's like, okay, so now we got the SPLC in on this. And so they use it as an excuse of whoa, they did this because of Waco and everything. It's like, no, I mean, they chose a date and it was in the back of their minds and everything, but they, you know, it was a plot. It was just a plot to set off a bomb. And, you know, a lot of people say there were bombs in the building. There was definitely a tow missile in the building. There was an ATF I think it was on the top floor. There was an ATF office that no one showed up to on that day. And at that time of day when that went off, it would have already been full, but it was empty. And apparently they had a tow missile up there that was found in the wreckage. I'm just throwing that out there because it's just also nuts. And, you know, there's a good documentary, I think it's still on Amazon Prime, called A Noble Lie. And it goes through all this stuff about OKC. Officer Terrence Yeeke, who, you know, had said that he had seen John Doe number 2, and then it talks about Jesse, the Trinidad family, and all this. I mean, just all this insane stuff that just, when it all comes down to it, it's basically caused by the government. I mean, Ruby Ridge would have never happened if the government just minded their own business. Waco would have never happened if the government just minded their own business. And Oklahoma City happened, and it looks like the FBI helped them plan it. And it was one of those things where they were going to stop it at the last minute and seem like heroes. And from what I understand, a second truck was rented. And because at the last minute, Timothy figured out that, you know, they had some undercover people there. And while they were following one truck, there was another truck there. The truck went to the Murrow building. So, yeah, I mean, you have all these things happening, and the first two would never have happened if the state hadn't shown up. And the second one probably wouldn't have happened if the FBI didn't help them plan it as their little, you know, like they do now with trapping terrorists, where they go after some guy who's posts some stuff online and they're like, hey, you see how they're bombing this country over there? You want us to teach you how to build a bomb? And then, I mean, basically, I forget, who is it? Aronson wrote the book, The Terror Factory. And it basically goes over, I think it's Aronson, I can't remember, but it's a book called The Terror Factory. And it just goes over all that, how, you know, basically when an Islamic terrorist is caught on the United States soil, it's always because the FBI convinced him to do it. And then at the last second, they swoop in and they arrest him when he goes to buy the materials or something like that. So.
Well, that's kind of the Randy Weaver thing too. I mean, they were trying to convince him to cut out the gun. Do you know if the new, you know, that Biden selected a new ATF director, Chipman or something like that? Is that legitimately a picture of him standing on the rubble, or do you know if that's fake? I mean, I know he was involved at Waco.
It hasn't been confirmed. I mean, I asked Scott, and really I should Probably should get in touch with Dan Gifford and see if he knows, but I don't think that can be confirmed that it was actually him. But he definitely had something to do with the whole operation. He may have been there, but there was a lot of people. I mean, Len Haruchi, the sniper from
Lon.
Ruby Ridge, Lon Haruchi. He was, I think he was blue team at Waco. So, yeah, I mean, that guy should have been in a jail cell in Idaho. But he was
Idaho DA, I mean, you probably know this, the Idaho DA filed charges against him, and it was progressing. And then supremacy clause, they moved it to a federal jurisdiction. And then the feds said, we don't need to have that. But pretty aggressive. Before we finish out here, I want to know, you've made some comments about the non-aggression principle, right? Non-aggression principle. You could describe it as you want, but I want to get your whole feeling. If you're an adopter of it, you think it's useful, and then with that in mind, these situations with Ruby Ridge and Waco, and how we differentiate ourselves from or the riots this summer, right? Do you adopt the non-aggression principle, and what's your take on that?
I mean, the non-aggression principle just says you won't initiate violence against somebody else for political ends. Well, I mean, that's what the government does every day. The existence of the government is a violation of the non-aggression principle. So what I ask is, if you are going to adopt the non-aggression principle, and what happens when someone breaks it? What happens when someone violates it? What do?
You defend yourself.
Well, yeah. And if the government says you can't leave your house and you can't go to work, and we're going to destroy your savings and destroy your health, what do? Is it a violation of the non-aggression principle? And what do? If you're not ever going to say that somebody is stepping over the line, if the state is not stepping over the line, non-aggression principle is useless. It's just something. I mean, maybe it's a suicide pact where you live by it, but no one else does. And that allows them to be able to lord over you. Do
you differentiate it between government entities then and in your personal life? Because I'm sure or maybe you don't.
Well, I mean, I don't want to use aggressive violence against anyone to get my way. But I actually think that violence is justified in certain ways, at certain times, and not only when somebody is aggressing against you. I mean, if they're destroying your life by telling lies about you, or they're getting you fired or something like that, and this is basically what the government does in taxation, things like that, basically destroying your livelihood, then I think you have a valid argument for using violence and stopping that person from doing it. Sure.
Okay, well, we'll finish up here. I just had a question for you. So I know you discussed monarchy and Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy That Failed, Democracy of the God That Failed, or whatever that is, with Curtis Yarvin. What is your feeling of the current royals?
Oh, well, that's not a monarchy. That's just a show. I mean, a monarchy is somebody who owns. A monarch would own all the land. So, if the royals actually said, okay, we own all of England, if you live here, you are actually on our land, we're going to charge you taxes for that. I mean, if there was actually a formal system set up like that, then I think it's preferable to democracy 100%. Sure. At least you know who to blame when things are going bad, and if things go really bad, you know where to point the gun.
Yeah, we also would have accepted inbred, but that's fine. So why don't you tell us, everyone, where they can find you and what you're doing? I think you said you're going to Pork Fest. Oh, and then lastly, you've got a new documentary coming about as well. So maybe just plug everything and give us an idea about that.
Sure. Freeman Beyond the Wall podcast. The new documentary, the follow-up to Monopoly on Violence, is going to be America's Police Crisis, americaspolicecrisis.com. You can donate there. I'm going to be in Washington State next week. I'll be speaking next Friday. I believe that's the 23rd. and in the evening there. And
Do you know where in Washington?
it's Port Orchard.
Okay.
Port
Orchard?
Orchard. Yeah, Port Orchard. And so, yeah, that'll be the Libertarian Party Washington convention. And then after that, I will, I'll be at Pork Fest. From Pork Fest goes a week. I'll be there Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Probably Thursday and Wednesday, I'll be getting in the afternoon late. And then Saturday morning, I'll be leaving early. So Thursday and Friday, if you're there, find me. It'll be the best time to get me because I should be there all day.
Are you coming out to Nevada? I thought you said something about was they having a Libertarian conference out there at all?
I would love to go to the LP convention at Nevada, but haven't been invited. So,
do you have to be invited?
Yeah, there are some libertarians that really need to be
ousted,
shown the door.
That's a brutal one. What about the one here in California? I think that's coming up in May. And I think we're having Thaddeus Russell and Bryant or Hotep Jesus is going to be speaking out here.
I wish I could be. Yeah, I wish I could be there for that, but I can't be there for that.
You going to be doing any more traveling, or just a little bit here and there?
Yeah, just a little bit here and there until I can get out of the job. If I can quit my job soon enough, then I'll try to do as much traveling as possible. But got to be invited too. So.
That's true. So and this is the last thing here. So you said about quitting your job. Is the podcast and everything else, the movie, is that getting you in line to be able to quit the job and do this full time?
Well, I mean, at this point, I don't really have any advertising revenue. And so the movie, we don't make any money off of the documentaries. We didn't make a dime off the first documentary. We're not going to make a dime off of this. I don't know if we'll ever make money off a documentary. So I just basically rely on membership through my website, donations through my website, still have Patreon, still have Subscribestar, and my Substack, pquinones.substack.com. So that's where I'm, if I have a goal that I put up on the website at freemanbeyondthewall.com/goal. Once that hits a certain amount, then I'll be able to do this full time and seek to put out 4 or 5 episodes a week while still writing and trying to do a whole bunch of other stuff. I'll have freed up a lot of time and just seek to put out as much as possible, because I think at no other point in history than right now is we need to we need a push to get people to wake up to exactly what's going on.
Well, I agree. And I really appreciate you coming on here. Do you prefer people going to your website or Patreon to be a subscriber? I was with Patreon. You told us to move over to your website, but I think I need to go back to Patreon as well, just to make sure I get all the early feeds. What's the suggestion there?
You should still, if you were on Patreon, you have access to the RSS feed, and you can just plug that into any podcatcher, and you'll still get the episodes.
All right, maybe I need to talk to your ID department.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll send you a copy of the RSS feed, but I would prefer people do it through my website. I have control over it, and actually, Patreon takes a lot of fees out, and through my website, it's not as it's like half the fees. So.
Pete Quinones, Freeman Beyond the Wall podcast. I really appreciate you coming on today, Pete. You made my day. A fan gets to meet his I don't know, idol or celebrity. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Appreciate it.
No problem.